So what we're going to do now is use something in jQuery that allows us to specifically go out and get JSON from an API. So we're going to go ahead and do $, but instead of opening and closing our parens, we're not going to have to select anything. We're just going to do $dot get JSON. And what this does is allows us to give a URL, and that URL will then go out and retrieve the data and return it to us so that we can use it here inside of our JavaScript. So if we go back into Chrome and take a look at these URLs that we were using, we have api.github.com/users/username. I'm going to take this whole URL and place it in quotes here. So what's going to happen is this is actually going to go out and grab this information, and we're not going to set it to a variable. Instead, we have to pass it a callback function. So this function here will get called once this data has been retrieved. And the reason is that this could take a while to happen. And in the case of GitHub, it's going to happen pretty quickly, but sometimes this won't always happen immediately, and you need to be able to act on it once it's done. And so what's going to happen is this function will call, and this looks exactly like we've been working with things like our event handler, is that we have this function that will run once we've grabbed this data, and now the data will be available to us inside of this variable. And so if we console log data, we should see my information because we're asking for my GitHub profile. So let's go back into our project. Let's type in my name and open our inspector just so we can check out the console. When we hit search, you get back an object, and we can open it up and see that all of those keys and values are available for us to use. At this point, it's expected that we were going to be getting JSON, so you'll see the difference here is that these these keys have quotes around them, and that's because this is a JSON string. So it has been turned into a string so that we can easily transmit this across the internet. And when we ask for it here, GetJSON knows that we are getting JSON, and once we have it, it converts it to a JavaScript object for us. So we don't have to do anything at this point. We can actually console log individual parts of this object. So if you look here, login, avatar URL, bio, blog, and so forth, all of these keys are now accessible to us in this object. So instead of outputting the whole data, we can do data dot, and we can say blog, avatar URL, name. So let's output my regular name. And so if we save that, and now instead of seeing a whole blob of text, we're going to see my actual name output to the screen. So now we can use this data, and we can use selectors to actually build out a profile down here that has all the information that we need. If we go ahead and output our data again, we'll see that inside this object we have an avatar URL. If we go to this URL, let's get rid of these quotes here, you'll see that it's a picture, so we can use that. We also have access to a website blog URL, a bio if it exists. Looks like I don't have a bio, or a company assigned. An email, you'll never get an email because we haven't logged into GitHub, and you're not going to be able to see other people's email addresses that easily. GitHub does know what your email is, and so they actually use that themselves. Hireable, so in GitHub you can actually mark that you're available for work, and so in my case I'm not, but you might have true there. And then it lists the number of repos that I have, how many people are following me, am I a company or a user, so forth. So let's go ahead and see how we might use this information. So let's pop back into our index, and I'm going to create an, let's create an H2 here, and let's give this a new row. And we're going to create 2 columns. So let's just split it in half. We'll do column 6. And again, the column grid system in Bootstrap is comprised of a 12 grid. So if we want to split it in half, we would divide it by 2 to get 6 and 6. And so now we can have two different columns here. On the left side, I'm going to create an H2, and this will eventually have our name inside of it. And from our HTML, we have no way of actually adding our name in here. So instead, I'm going to give it an ID of name. And we can then also come in and add a paragraph tag and give that an ID of location. And now we have two things that we can attach to, an ID of name and an ID of location. So in our JavaScript, we can target those with location and with $name. And you can set the text of them or set the HTML of them because they're both HTML elements. You won't be able to set the value of them because they are not input fields. So what we have here is the ability to do data.location and data.name. And if we refresh this and go ahead and search for Colin Loretz and hit search, now you see my name and my location shows up. So let's go ahead and add my avatar image in here as well. So we're going to do image source equals, and we don't have a URL here yet, so this is going to work just like down below. There's no way we know what size we want for or what URL we want for this image yet. So I am going to do some bootstrap things here. So if I do image circle, this will actually make our profile image into a circle, and it'll just do that for us. You can also do that on your own if you want to add your own styling. And so we need to give this an ID or a class as well so that we can target it. And I'm just going to do avatar as an ID. And we want to fill in our source attribute when we have a URL. So the way that we can do that in jQuery is with the attribute method, which is attr. And the attribute method takes two things. It takes the new value, and it also takes the attribute name. So in our case, we want to replace source, src, with data.avatar URL. And we know that avatar URL is what we want because if we console log data again, we can see it in this list. So avatar URL is here. So this is way too big. So we can go in and actually add our first line of CSS to #avatar. And let's just give it a width of 100 pixels. And go ahead and search again. Now that looks a little bit more sane. There's still a lot that we would want to do to clean this up. Add some space, make the search bar go all the way across, which we can do in a little bit. But let's keep going and add a few more items. So let's go ahead and add a paragraph, but inside of it we're going to create a button. Let's go ahead and do a tags. So these are going to be links. And we're going to create two of those. And those two links are going to have two different IDs. So let's do the blog URL on one, and let's do the GitHub URL on the other. Let's do _URL. And then we're not going to put anything in. Let's actually put something inside. Let's do GitHub for the GitHub one and blog for the blog one. But again, we don't have anything to place into the href. So the href is our the link that we want to actually take the user to. So again, we're going to do what we did with image and replace our source tag here. So in here we can say .blog URL .attr href, and the URL for the blog is just data.blog. We can do one more for the GitHub URL .attr href data.url. And now we should be able to see these links show up. So we refresh, you'll see that we already have these links, and if we click on them, they won't go anywhere because they are just going to take us to the same page. So what we don't want is we want to make these into buttons, but we also want to hide everything that's down below until we have searched for something. So let's first make them into buttons. If we just add a class of button, and let's do button primary, and a class of button with button success. These button primary and button success classes will actually change the color of the button. So here we have a blue one and a green one. But again, we don't want to see these until we've actually searched for something. So let's go into our CSS, and we have this ID of results. Let's just go ahead and hide it. And if we do that, it will now be hidden. If I go ahead and search, it'll still be hidden even though our results are being displayed. So we need to use show when we search to bring that up. So once we search, we can go ahead and do $pound results.show. And when we go ahead and search for things, we should get them to pop up. And we aren't. Let's see what we're missing here. Results. So I was missing the S. So let's go ahead and do colon Loretz. And now that shows up. So now we have the ability to, if we click on either of these, go to a URL. So this one took me to my blog. This one took me to the API URL. So we actually want to take the person to the GitHub URL instead. So let's see if there is a way to get there. It looks like HTML URL will take them there instead. So we were sent to this URL, which is the wrong one. So let's go ahead and change that. Now when we refresh, search, click on GitHub, now we get taken to my GitHub. So that looks good.